Hello and welcome to the People Who Read People podcast with me, Zachary Elwood. This is a podcast about understanding other people and understanding ourselves. You can learn more about it and browse the most popular episodes at behavior-podcast.com. This podcast initially came about due to me having written some well-known books on reading tells and poker. And those books were a result of me playing poker for a living back between 2003 and 2007. My first book, Reading Poker Tells, released in 2012, got many positive reviews from both amateur and professional level poker players, which led to it selling a lot of copies and it being translated into 8 languages. It also led to me writing 2 follow-up books, Verbal Poker Tells, which is the book I am most proud of, and Exploiting Poker Tells, which summarized my thoughts at that time on poker tells, nonverbal and verbal, and which I think will be my final book. You can learn more about my Poker Tells work and read reviews at readingpokertells.com. The success of my Poker Tells books and video series got me thinking about ways to branch out into more mainstream, non-poker related areas. From a young age, I've always been interested in psychology and behavior. That was the main reason for my initial interest in poker. And so that's what led to the decision to do a general psychology and behavior podcast. This background might make the title of this podcast make a bit more sense, People Who Read People. It was a play on the song People Who Need People, and it also pointed at my intention to talk to a lot of people who read people in various ways, whether that's reading tells in poker or in other games and activities, or in other specific domains, or whether it was just understanding people's psychological motivations. This episode will be a portion of a webinar I did recently with Terry Wood, who's the creator of the poker education and community website Poker Railbird. That's pokerrailbird.com. It will be me talking about a few of the most reliable and useful types of tells in poker, and about the art of reading tells in general. If you're interested in behavior but not a poker player, I think you'll still find this interesting, as some of the tells and dynamics discussed apply to non-poker real-world situations. You might just find it interesting to hear about reading behavior in a realm that you're not that familiar with. In a later episode, I want to talk about how I see reading poker tells as related to deception detection and situations like interrogations and such. A lot of people mistakenly think that reading poker tells is about detecting lies or detecting deception, but it's not. In fact, some people might be surprised to find out that I don't think you can reliably use nonverbal behavior to detect deception. If you'd like more information about that, I recommend listening to a previous episode where I talk with Tim Levine about the difficulty of using nonverbal behavior to detect deception, and about what the research tells us on that front. But long story short, reading people well in poker is not about detecting lies, but about detecting relaxation and anxiety, detecting focus or lack of focus in specific situations, things like this. These things give you clues about someone's state of mind and emotions, which in a game like poker, where players are often in very emotionally polarized states, can be valuable. But that is not what is referred to as deception detection in the behavior arena. It's just observing people's states and deducing someone's likely hand strength in a certain situation based on those states. Put another way, a bluff is not the same thing as a lie. And someone leaking signs of relaxation when they're betting a strong hand also has nothing to do with lying. But I'll delve more into that in a future episode. Just a heads up that this episode is on YouTube and includes video, so you might enjoy watching it there. If you're a poker player, Terry said he plans on doing more of these free webinars in the future. So if you're interested in that, you can sign up for his email list on his site, pokerrailbird.com. And if you want the complete talk, which goes into more detail, including about my background and what led to me deciding to write my first book on poker tells, that's on my site, behavior-podcast.com. Just look for the entry for this episode there, and I'll have a link to Terry's full webinar. Okay, here's the talk with Terry Wood of pokerrailbird.com.
So another question, in your experience, what are some of the most common tells that players tend to give off at the table, and how reliable are they?
Yeah, I'd say the 2 classes that I like to talk about when it comes to most reliable and most useful. There's the class of relaxed behaviors from people making significant bets. So that would be things like somebody making a big bet on the river and just being more loose behaviorally or verbally. And that's a wide class of things, but like it gets into more subtle things like they're, and this is one of the more useful ones specifically, is the looseness with which people's eyes move around after they bet. That's under the category of loose behaviors when somebody's relaxed, but people are, it's also something where most people aren't thinking about it very much, right? Like, so imagine somebody makes a big bet and they're bluffing. Like the usual tendency for people is to stare at like one place, right? They'll just stare at like maybe they'll like move their eyesight like to different places, like maybe once to the player, once to the dealer, once to the table or the cards, but their eyes aren't very dynamic. They'll just move like one place, it'll stay there for a while, another place, it'll stay there for a while. But if you see somebody whose eyes are just kind of like loosely moving around, like, over here, over here, over here, and like that, the dynamicism basically of the eye movement is a really valuable clue. And that's just something because it's lesser known, right? Like they could be very still, like people know to be very still and consistent and things like that with their arms and, how they move their head and these kinds of things. But they're not really thinking about like how they move their eyes and how much they give away there. So the eyes are definitely, and there's other things in the eye contact too. Basically there can be player, not everybody, but there can be player specific tells of the categories of like some people are more likely to look at the other person when they're bluffing, and some people are unlikely to look at the other person when they're bluffing. So I think that gets into like Caro's stuff being a bit simplistic, because he talked about in his book, and it's much more well known, the idea that like when somebody's staring at you after they make a big bet, they're more likely to be bluffers. But I actually think, as I write my stuff, and as I think most experienced players would agree with me, that it's actually the reverse is more common. Like somebody who's willing to make eye contact with you after they bet, mostly, generally speaking, are the more relaxed people, and they don't like, most people actually are uncomfortable making eye contact with you when they're bluffing. But that can vary. But just to say, there's a general pattern that I think Caro got wrong for the general population. And then there can be player specific things of like, once you notice a regular player you're playing against, he might have an opposite pattern of that. And then some people, of course, won't have patterns at all and will be pretty consistent. But the eye contact and eye quality, like I mentioned, of like moving the eyes, how they move their eyes around, those things can be very valuable. And then real quick, I'll say the other valuable class of tells, like the category of tells, is people being quite doing kind of unfocused, ostentatious behaviors early in a hand. So I'll give you an example of what I mean. Like, say somebody raises pre-flop and they're kind of like doing a few things, like they're checking their cards or they say something, or, whatever it is, a couple of things that basically just show they're not that focused on the hand, which will tend to mean weakness. And so those are kind of spots where I'm more likely to apply some pressure, or maybe more likely to call and see the flop with them or something. But it basically just means like players in those spots are less likely to be at the top of the range. So basically another way to say it is, say they look down at aces and they raised. Like people in those with the top of their range will usually be more thoughtful, and they'll be thinking and considering, because they know they're probably going to go pretty far in the hand, so they'll be like thinking about the hand more. Whereas people with weaker hands are just not thinking about it as much, because they're like, well, if I miss the flop, I'm just going to fold, or whatever it is. They're not as committed to the hand. So it comes out in these kind of like ways they pay attention to their hand, or the ways they are more stoic or more movement. They move around more. And that can even be, things on the flop too, not just pre-flop, where it's like the pre-flop raiser bets and is like, doesn't really seem that focused on the hand, is like checks his phone, or like, makes a joke, and these kinds of things. Like these kinds of things when the pot isn't big yet. So the dynamics kind of swing the bigger the pot gets, because basically, long story short, things kind of reverse a little bit, because once the pot is big, then people are like, and the hand is near over, things can kind of reverse. But early in a hand, when the pot isn't built yet, people with stronger hands are more focused on the hand and thinking about how how can I best play this hand kind of thing, right? So that's where so you basically have early in a hand, you have like tells that you'll see that are more correlated to weakness that will make you do things more like bluff or call and see a flop or go a little further in the hand, these kinds of things. And then later in the hand, you have the classic tells where are more likely to, when they're meaningful, are more likely to be helping you fold because they're tells of strength, right? And I go into more detail of this in my content where it's basically like it can be hard to get tells of strength early in a hand, and it can be hard to get tells of weakness later in a hand. And some of the reasons I just discussed are the reasons there, because people just have more different kinds of tells in different spots, if that makes sense.
Yeah, absolutely. Yep.
And then I guess my last question for you is, what are some of the most prominent misconceptions when interpreting tells?
Yeah, I think kind of related to what I was talking about with the eye contact one, where Caro said, bluffers, when somebody stares at you after they make a big bet, they're more likely to be bluffing. I think that and similar spots are one of the major misconceptions people have, because a lot of people think of things like, they think of Caro's thing basically like it's reverse. Strong means weak and weak means strong, right? But I think in practice, when it comes to players who have strong hands and they're relaxed, a lot of times strong just means strong, right? So that kind of relates to what I just said about it can be, it can be harder. It can be easier to get tells of strength because people just react in more relaxed ways. So, for example, like staring at someone after they made a big bet, like somebody who has a strong hand, that's a tell of strength. Like it's expressing some confidence, and it will often be from people who are confident. Another example would be a player saying something like, "Yeah, I've got a strong hand," or whatever they say. "I've got it," or "I've got this strong hand." It's like from a weak means strong means weak perspective, they'd be unlikely to say that with a strong hand. But in practice, though, because you will often see that because people are just so relaxed, they'll say all kinds of things. They'll say their hand's weak. They'll say their hand's strong. Basically, another way to say this is when you're more relaxed, your behavior covers a wider range of things, right? It's like it's not constrained to just acting weak. It includes acting strong too, just because you're so relaxed. You're just like, I'm going to do whatever weird things occurs to me because I'm having fun and I'm feeling good about the situation, right? So I think that is often a misconception, because like I was talking to a high stakes player recently about that. And, we were talking about like, from his perspective, he was saying, they made a strong hand about their statement. So they're likely to be, they're likely to be weak because they're trying to prevent an obstacle to me playing, when they make a big bet. And I was like, well, not necessarily, because, like I say, like in my books, I think often that will be a strong, even mostly be a player who's relaxed, just being loose and weird and trying to be a little tricky with their behavior, right? So that's one big misconception. And then I think another one is just the importance of context, because I think Caro's book and other conceptions people have formed is often like, well, this means that and this means that, and it's very static. But I think there's so much about the importance of context, which is that's what people liked about my first book, Reading Poker Tales, because I talk about these various factors, right? Like, board texture is a factor. Like I would act on specific behaviors and specific tells differently based on the board texture, because a specific behavior could be meaningful on one board texture, but not meaningful on another. That's one example. Then like how far along the hand is too, because the farther the hand is to over, the less there is to think about. So somebody who's bet on the river obviously has nothing to think about, which gets into like how focused they are. Whereas somebody early in a hand has a lot to think about, with a good hand or even a bad hand. So that's another factor. And then just like whose turn is it to act too, right? Like somebody staring at you when they're waiting for you to act is a lot different from a bettor staring at you after they bet, right? So just to say there's all these behavioral or all these situational categories and factors that factor into things. And I think that's kind of what I focused on. I think that's what people have really appreciated about my stuff, because I've tried to focus on the situational factors and how those apply to the range of behaviors, as opposed to just being like, here's a tell, here's another tell, here's another tell. I'm trying to get people to see how the situational factors basically affect people and affect a wide range of behaviors.
Makes sense, because I'm thinking I really haven't played all that much at all. But my deal is, as the pot gets bigger, the more I get stressed. And I know.
Yeah, exactly. Yeah, that's definitely, and you can see that especially like if you watch the high stakes poker tournaments online. You know, like the more money is on the line, you know, the more a bluff starts to really make your blood run cold, right? And
Right.
It's yeah. If you're interested in playing poker online, I want to talk about a new site for playing real money poker games that's launching in October. It's called Phenom Poker. You can find details about this and get a link with my referral code at the top of my site, readingpokertells.com. What makes Phenom Poker different from other sites is that it relies on cryptocurrency, so that when you buy in and cash out, the money goes directly into your personal wallet, so that you never have more money at risk than what you have on the table at the moment. If you're like me and have some trepidation about sites going bankrupt or being shut down and your money disappearing, that can make a big difference. And then also they've implemented quite a few security-related protocols that other sites don't have, like occasionally using video-based identity verification to ensure real people are playing and that players are who they say they are, things like this. Another interesting thing about it is that early users are part owners of the site, and that they can get tokens for spreading the word about Phenom Poker and getting people to sign up, much like I'm doing now. In order to take advantage of that promotional offer, you need to use my referral link, which is at the top of my site, readingpokertells.com, or at least you have to use someone's referral link if it's not mine. Now, as you know, if you've listened to this podcast for a bit or followed me for poker-related things over the years, it's rare for me to promote anything. Honestly, I don't even like promoting my own stuff, let alone other people's stuff that I don't believe in or haven't found value in myself. But after thinking about this for a while and seeing what some other people I respected in the poker space thought about it, I felt good promoting this. The things I've mentioned, the fact that you have control over your money and that you're risking nothing besides what you're currently playing with, and the security systems they're putting in place are some of the reasons. Then there's the fact that based on what I've seen, they are putting a lot of thought into the product and experience. And then there's also the fact that some people I respect in the poker world are promoting it. Again, you can get the referral link to sign up for Phenom Poker at the top of my site at readingpokertells.com. And I'll have a link there for you to learn more about their poker site. Okay, back to the talk with Terry.
Yeah, so along those lines on the stakes, do you see? I mostly play 2-5. Sometimes I play 5-10, but if they don't really have 5-10 games at the Bow except on Saturday sometimes. Mostly it's 2-5 games, about as far as it gets. But anyway, do you see? So I haven't played any 10-20 or any of that. So as you move up into stakes, do you see more, less tails, different? How does that?
I think, I've always been really transparent. I've never been a high stakes player. Like the highest I've played has been 5-10, no limit. And, so I've never sought out the poker player lifestyle basically. And I always like to be really honest about that. And I've also hardly played any tournaments, which some people are like, you don't have any tournament results. I've always been a cash game player. I've never tried to be a tournament player. I've only played a handful of tournaments. So I just like to make that clear for anybody who thinks I'm like, I want to be very transparent about my background and such. But I do, I've watched a lot of streams for higher stakes games. Obviously I was hired by a couple WSOP main event final table players to study, the final table of the World Series of Poker. I've watched a lot of high stakes cash and cash end tournaments. I've been hired by people to analyze their footage from some live streams. And I'll say, I think mostly the tells are the same, from once you get, basically like the same kinds of tells you'll see at a 2-5 game are present for the higher stakes games because, mostly it's because the recreational players who are playing there, if they're playing those stakes, the money is the same to them, right? As it is to the lower stakes recreational players. That's one reason. But also I think mostly it's because even no matter the skill of the players, there's very little, contrary to what people think, there's very little like reverse tells when it comes to like skilled players playing each other. And the reason you don't really see that, I mean, it happens occasionally. I talk about it a little bit in my book, but it's actually much more rare than people think. And it's kind of easy to understand why, because when you start getting into it, like, I'm going to fake this behavior because I think that they're likely to interpret it in this other way. Past the first level of that, it gets very complex. So, and people will easily psych themselves out. It just gets too confusing to think about. So in practice, even the good players mostly just stay stoic, or they have like the same tells in a more subtler form, which is much more common. Like the tells I've seen at, like, you know, the final table at the World Series of Poker main event are the same kinds of tells you will see at a 1-3 or 2-5 game. They might just be a little bit more subtle, but even some of them are just straight up like the same tells though, and just as extreme. I mean, I've seen really obvious tells at the World Series of Poker main event and in high stakes cash live streams from really good players who just aren't aware of how much information they're giving away. Right. Or occasionally they may be doing it to focus because they think they're trying to manipulate a specific player, in which case they're doing it purposely. But sometimes I just see people giving away information, good players, and I think it's because they just aren't aware of, like, say, the verbal poker tells, which are lesser known, right? So if that answers his question, yeah, I do think it is mostly the same tells. They're just much less common, I would say. Yeah.
So do you think the players are, I don't know how to put this, so your higher stakes cash game players, are they really good at covering up their own tells, or is it just because they've played so much they just don't have tells?
I think it's more the first. I mean, I think anybody who I think it's anybody that that is aware of the major tells can pretty easily make themselves pretty unreadable. It's just a matter of knowing what the major tells, most of the major tells are, and then trying your best to be stoic, right? So, and I think, you know, most people that are playing seriously, even recreational players that are playing pretty high, most of them are pretty good at being unreadable. Like, yeah, so the higher up you go, barring a table that has just a lot of, you know, rich recreational players at it or something, the higher up you go, the less you'll find useful tells. But having said that, there can be a lot of value in decisions, because good players often put each other in decisions that can easily go either way because they're playing a very balanced style often. So just to say, a little bit of behavioral information can go a long way, because you're so often in these spots that are kind of even money, right? Like whether you call or you fold. And I was talking to I can't say his name, but a high stakes player recently, and he was describing getting a lot of traction off these things where it's like, even if he thought the tell was only like 60-70% accurate, right? It's like, because he's so often put in these spots that could go either way versus good players, if he thought it was, you know, likely to be a read, he would just adjust and make that call or that fold based on that read. And that is, you know, that can be very valuable, because if your opponent just has even something that you think is a little slightly reliable, that goes a long way in the long term if you're often playing, especially if you're often playing that player, like in the regs type games. So hopefully that answers the question a bit.
Yeah. One, I don't know, it's been a while back, probably a year or so, that I saw this, and I know it was probably an older video, but you were playing, I think it was at Hustler Live, and you were in a hand, I think you were in seat 3, and the commentator's commentating, and of course they're saying, you know, Zachary Elwood, the human lie detector. And you had, on the flop, you had an open-ended straight draw, and the other guy had flopped a set, and you folded. You saw the turn, and then you folded. But what was it? I mean, I know you probably don't remember that particular hand, but could you tell us about when you've picked up on a tell like that would make you, you know, never mind the pocket tens in Albuquerque, but a tell that would make you fold or call, that it was that compelling of a tell?
Yeah, I can't remember that one. I never played on Hustler.
Oh, what?
It
Okay,
was
may
probably.
have been
I
something else.
I did play on like a pretty small stakes one for what is it called? Live at the Bike a long time ago. Maybe that
That's
was
what it
it.
was. That's
Oh,
what it was.
okay, yeah.
It
I
was an
can't remember that
older
hand though.
video. Yeah, it was
Huh.
an older video.
Well, I do think. I do think often the. Yeah, getting back to like what I think is one of my strengths, or the strengths of anybody who's pretty good at reading tells is being able to fold in spots where other people can't, right? So I do make what I think are a lot of good folds and save a lot of money that way. And yeah, I don't know about that hand specifically, but yeah, I'm trying to think of. Do you want me to just give you an interesting? I don't know.
Yeah. Just when a tale was so
Yeah.
compelling and kind of what that tale was.
Oh yeah, well, one that comes to mind was I wrote about it on my Substack recently because I was driving across the country and I stayed in Reno overnight and I played some 1-3 right outside the hotel there. And one interesting hand was I had just sat down, so I didn't know the players at all. I played like a round or something, and I raised with pocket aces, got like 3 callers. Flop came like, what was it? 4-4-3. Rainbow. I bet again. I get 1 caller, the other caller, like 2 callers, but one's all in, so he doesn't really count. But so then on the turn though, the turn's like 9 or something, kind of a blank. He checks to me, and I bet like I think it was like $80, and he says he immediately says, "How much is it?" Which is a valuable tell because. My main fear at that point is that he has a 4. That's the main thing I'm afraid of if he continues, sure. Right? Or if he raises. But when he says really quickly, how much is it? That's a pattern that often shows up from people that are just like kind of irritated with the situation, right? Like it's something getting back to like if he had a 4, let's say, or flopped a full house or whatever, he would be much more focused and cagey. He'd be somebody who's slow playing is like, being very thoughtful. He's not gonna immediately ask how much is it. That's more of somebody who's like kind of frustrated with the situation and has a genuine thought about whether they should continue. So when he says that, and I was thinking like he struck me as the kind of player that was capable of bluff raising me or bluffing me on the river if the right card came. Right, he struck me as that kind of player just based on a few things that I talked about in the Substack. But when he said that, I was like, oh, I'm pretty sure he's weak here. So that meant like if he decided to raise me there, or if he called and then bet a lot on the river, I was much more likely to call him based on that one little tell. Now that's kind of an interesting spot, which is why I wrote about it, because usually it's not too often you'll get an earlier read that'll help you make a big call later in the hand. That doesn't happen too often, so that's kind of interesting. But usually when you're getting tells from somebody who's making a big bet, it'll be tells of strength. It'll be somebody just saying something or doing something that is really unlikely for a bluffer to do, and I'd say that's the large majority. Like when it comes to like the percentage of money I've made from using tells, I would say the large majority of it comes from people who are just doing unusually relaxed things, like when he gets into the verbal. I don't think we've talked much about the verbal stuff, but the verbal stuff can be really important. So let's say they make a big bet and you ask them something like, "Oh, did you get that 2 pair?" and they say no. Like when they deny having one of the strong hands possible, that's highly likely that they're relaxed and have a strong hand, just because a bluffer is very unlikely to make what I call a weak hand statement. Like a bluffer is very unlikely to weaken their range, basically. So whether they volunteer that or whether they say it in response to a question, like when somebody is willing to say, "Oh, I don't have one of the strong hands possible," it just becomes so much more likely they have one of the other strong hands and they're just relaxed, right? So that's a verbal example. And then there's like all sorts of ways that somebody can do physical things where you're just like, that is super unlikely for a bluffer to do in that spot. Like a bluffer is just going to be much more buttoned down and be much more careful. And I think the wide variety, and some of them are pretty obvious, a player just like talking and laughing a lot, like giving the speech, you know, as people would say in the old days, like, oh, he's giving a speech when he bets, like it's much more likely to be strong, you know, like that's kind of like the variety of tells we're talking about there. But it can apply to just like loose physical behavior, loose, you know, gestures with hands. Like one example I'll give you, like flipping a chip end over end is a very relaxed behavior, and you will hardly ever see a bluffer like flipping a chip end over end. They might, you know, they'll shuffle the cards, but like the kind of like chip flipping thing is strangely something that you'll barely ever see a bluffer do. And it has something to do with like, it's a kind of like loose, kind of gravity defying thing. It's almost like a carefree kind of thing. Whereas like chip riffling is something that everybody can do, but it's because it's less exuberant in some way. But just to give you those are the kind of classes of tells that we're talking about. Yeah. That was a talk with Terry Wood of railbirdpoker.com. If you like this talk, just a reminder that Terry will be doing more talks like these in the future, so you can sign up to be on his email list at railbirdpoker.com to hear about those webinars. I'm Zach Elwood. You can learn more about my PokerTells books and videos at readingpokertells.com. If you're a poker player, I have several other episodes in the back catalog about poker and about some other games. Thanks for listening. Music by Small Skies.